Hey man,
Hello, hello. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and
Good.
clear.
I can hear you. I can hear you as well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
Sure, I'm good.
Yeah, still somewhat waking up, but
Yeah, it's 6 a.m. there. It's early.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But I woke up at 3:30, so
Oh wow. Is that normal for you or is that unusual?
not that early usually,
Uh-huh.
but I mean, ever since we had our kid, for a long time it was 5 a.m. Now it's been shifting a bit later, just desperately trying to catch up on some of that sleep. But
Sure. Yeah. Wow.
what about you? When do you
I normally
usually?
get up around 6:30 maybe. So not super early. I mean, I guess it's slightly on the early side, but not crazy.
I'd say
Um,
that's pretty early, certainly. Like
yeah.
for a creative person,
Right.
because
That's true.
it's usually the case that a creative might go to bed at 6:30. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, when I have a certain project, sometimes I have to just kind of throw all the rules out the window. But I
yeah,
find that my and we can I don't know if this is being recorded or if we are already on or we can hold some of
yeah,
these.
it's being recorded, but if you
Okay.
want, we can cut stuff
Mm,
out as well.
no,
So
that's fine. That's fine. But yeah, I find that my brain, I mean, everybody's brain works differently, but my brain works better in the morning. So after I have a cup of coffee and, do some light exercise or something, I get down to work. And those first maybe 3 or 4 hours after I start, sort of in between starting working and lunchtime, are usually my best hours, usually.
yeah, yeah, I've definitely I've done it both ways,
Hmm.
and there are perks and pitfalls. Well, not maybe pitfalls, but perks to both. But definitely, one of the biggest things I've noticed and realized is that when you wake up, your mind is at its sort of cleanest state,
Hmm.
like a clean slate, and it's
Hmm.
uninterrupted by the stress and the chores of the day. So you really have this most open view of
Hmm.
things, which obviously for creative purposes can be fantastic. But then
Hmm.
maybe on the back end, if you do stuff deep into the night, you get that kind of a unique, I don't know if delirious is the word that I'm looking for. Maybe not,
Yeah,
but some kind of a, weird mix of chemicals, and you're sort of going to sleep, but then you're activating yourself, and it's a weird mix of things.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've experienced that. And for collaboration, when I've ever worked in a band or in a recording studio or something like that, I do find that the late hours sometimes, if, I don't know, something about humans together at that time, you can really touch on some special stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that goes back to some of the, if you take the evolutionary perspective, the campfire thing,
Mm,
after the
absolutely.
day is done, and then people sit around a fire and socialize, etc. Maybe there's
Yeah.
some of
Yeah,
that element.
they let their guard down. They allow themselves to be a little more human and vulnerable and just honest with each other in a way. Yeah,
You know,
I think there's something to
definitely.
that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You said you do some light exercise in the morning. What do you,
Yeah,
is
I
that like
mean,
cardio or?
yeah, I should be doing more. It's mostly just like push-ups and sometimes I'll go for a walk. Sometimes I'll do some jump rope or something like that. But it's just light stuff around the house. Nothing. I should be doing more. I know that it's true. Um,
No, but that's already
mhm.
like, it's really good from a activation point of view. I think there's a lot
Mhm.
of research surfacing up now showing the benefits of just moving,
Yeah,
after you've woken up, and reaping the benefits of that. But
yeah,
but also, if you're doing some push-ups, that's also some strength work
right.
as well.
Yeah, but even just
But
stretching, I find I do sort of long. deep stretches. I find that helps a lot. Even something as simple as that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Mhm.
Well, before we dive any deeper, because this tends to be or has been an issue of mine. We've been talking for more than maybe half an hour, and I haven't even introduced the guest. So,
Sure.
um, so obviously, well, people see your name on this episode, but to those who are watching or listening who don't know who you are, briefly summarizing that. So you're a composer for games, video games, and other media.
Yeah.
Some of your credits on the video game front include Outreach and also Marvel versus Capcom Infinite.
Mhm.
Then you've done a bunch of TV and show stuff as well. Some
Mhm.
mentionable credits: SNL, NBC's Olympic broadcast, and then Law and Order, Criminal Intent. And you also run. I mean, you obviously do much of this work under the Silen Audio company name, but yeah, basically Silen Audio is a full service audio house, and you do music, you do sound design and audio programming, and also now you release virtual instruments as well. So,
That's
is
right.
there anything you want to add to that, or does that cover our
No,
bases?
I think that's pretty accurate summary. I've been in sort of whatever the space is, the audio space, the music space, for quite a long time. And I don't know. I guess I just get interested in different types of projects, different things, and I'll just sort of jump into a lot of variety of disciplines. So it's what keeps my brain sort of going in a way. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I think
Mhm.
that's to me that tends to be the mark of a creative. You know, you need something new. You need like a new stimulus, and
Mhm.
oftentimes it's like a creative death sentence to us to do the same thing every single day until the end of days, for us at least. So that makes complete sense. Before I forget this, I mean, Silent Audio has a really interesting name. Like I
Mhm.
said, so I did a demo on your Infinite Flow synth, and back then I said the T is silent, which is kind of
Mhm.
like a
Mhm.
cyclical. I don't know what to call that, but anyway, does silent so that's silent without the T.
Uh-huh.
Does that mean something, and where did that come from?
Yeah. So, when you think about music or really any sort of creative audio, it's silence is sort of the opposite. It's what some people are trying to avoid in a way. It's what they're fighting against in a weird way. And I almost think of it as sort of like a yin yang or something like that. You need to have a certain amount of silence, or you need to have sort of a certain amount of respect for what silence is, in order to make effective music, essentially. So even, rhythm is just a way of playing with bits of silence in between sort of punctuated, elements of sound. So that's a concept that I've been thinking about for years, and there's something almost sort of spooky and dangerous about silence when you're a musician or working in audio. So I kind of liked that it was sort of spooky in a weird way, when it comes to audio, and just sort of the dichotomy of silent audio, sort of opposites in a way. Yeah, so all wrapped up into this, all wrapped up into
And
one.
what happened with the T?
So we went through a lot of different variations of names. I went by Silence for a little while, and I just kind of liked it. When I removed the T, it started to take on its own sort of special thing that I hadn't heard or seen before. So I don't know. I played with the word silent and silence for a little while, and then eventually sort of landed on silent as the final name. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of I don't know what it is. Some maybe some character or something from a series. Like maybe it's like a Sith Lord or something. I don't know what I'm thinking, but there's
Yeah.
definitely something that it's evoking in me. But if we go way back to the beginning, where were you born?
So I was born in Maryland, so sort of near DC, so on the East Coast of the US. And I spent the first, about 18 years of my life there. And then I came out to the West Coast, and I also lived in New York and Brooklyn for about 5 years, but I've more or less been in LA most of my adult life, except for the time I was in Brooklyn for a little bit. So yeah, I've kind of back and forth on either side of the US most of my life. Yeah.
Yeah. And what was like musically speaking, your upbringing? Was music sort of around the house, or was it what kind of a path did you go with that?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, I've sort of realized later how sort of much music was in my household, and I appreciate it now more than I did when I was younger. My dad was sort of or is a jazz musician, sort of amateur for fun, but he would more or less always he would put on a record or put on the radio and just be playing along with it. And he would play a bunch of different, fingered, so flute or saxophone or clarinet. And so he'd be playing those. And we found these videos when I was a baby, and I was just sort of banging on a little drum, and he was just sort of playing, not really paying attention, but I think it was fun. And then I just always was drawn to music, even from, the moment I had any allowance or anything like that. I was buying cassettes and CDs, and just kind of very way more than anyone around. It was normal to me because I was just obsessed with it, but way more than anyone around me. I was just buying, just getting anything I could get my hands on, musically, pretty much.
And did you play an instrument, and what age did that come in?
So I started piano lessons. I was probably about 7 or 8, I would guess. I don't really remember, and I hated them. I mean, I still don't like. I'm practicing. Whatever the type of musician is that can sit in a room and just keep playing the same part over and over. I have the utmost respect for them, because that's just not really how my brain works. And so, I played, and then when I was old enough to play sports or something, I said, I'm done playing piano lessons, but really it was only about a couple years. And then I started to play guitar and bass guitar. And then I went back to the piano sort of in mid high school. I went back to it. And then that was on my own terms. It wasn't sort of being forced upon me. But yeah, so I definitely did have music was around. And then also early high school, I started to get into electronic music. And this is before, I mean, obviously, Pro Tools existed, computer-based music existed, but most people didn't really make music that way. So my first ever, I basically for almost a year, I was saving and asking, and then finally I got what's called an Akai MPC 2000 XL. So it's a sampler workstation, and I was sampling records and assembling them and stuff like that. So that was really when I began making music myself. Yeah.
And this was what age were you at that time?
I was maybe 15, 14, 15, around that age. Yeah.
And did you play in bands? You mentioned some stringed
Yeah. I
instruments.
played bass in some bands. I've played it's mostly bass. I'm passable at guitar and barely can fake my way through drums, but and sometimes on certain songs we'd switch out a little bit, but mostly I played bass. And I never loved it. I'm not driven by live music, or I'm not driven by like being in front of a crowd and hearing cheers and stuff like that. And again, the musicians who do that, I have the utmost respect for them, because it can be both really rewarding but also a really tough job. But yeah, for whatever reason, I've always been more comfortable just sort of working on my songs
in a dark studio
in a dark
somewhere.
studio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
about the collaborative aspect of the band stuff? Did you write music with the other members or not? And did you enjoy the process of the collaboration?
When most of the time, no. And it's because usually, just for whatever reason, you're not really clicking with the other person. I've had few people out there in the world that I have been able to musically vibe with, and likewise. And when that happens, you can really create some really exciting stuff. So it's rare, and you have to sort of hold on to it when it happens and cherish it in a way. So yeah, it definitely has happened a few times in some bands. Most of it, this is stuff that never got released, or if it got released, it was drastically different than when we originally wrote it. But yes, I have had some pretty, from a band perspective, I've had a pretty nice collaborative experiences, for sure.
Yeah. But it sounds like when you got that MPC, you sort of inched closer in towards something that was your thing.
Yeah, that's right. I've always liked electronic music. I've always liked hip hop, and I've always liked sort of this space sort of in between, and combining all that kind of stuff. And something about just being able to iterate and work on the same song over and over again, and make mistakes but then fix it, and just keep testing it until you get it right. That's just how I've always worked, and I still work that way. Yeah.
What sort of in terms of, you mentioned electronic music, did you have back then, what kind of stuff inspired you? What stuff did you listen to?
That's a good. So I listen to drum and bass and jungle a fair bit, because I did and still love the way they chop drums. You know, the amen break is the famous one of that. But I kind of the endless ways that you can take one little sample and make an entire genre of music out of it. I'll never get sick of that. I listen to stuff like Aphex Twin and DJ Shadow. DJ Shadow really operates in that world, sort of near hip hop, but also kind of experimental electronic. So that kind of stuff I definitely listen to a lot. And then just a lot of hip hop, I guess. There's really great producers that I think people don't pay attention to. Actually, now more than ever, it's interesting. The people that I used to love when I was a kid are now, 20 years later, finally people are writing books about them. And I go to a bar or a party, and people will put on someone like Jay Dilla, people write books about, and you hear his music out and about. And when I was young, it was like I was a weirdo for obsessing over some of this stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good example of just staying true to what you like and enjoy, and not, focus on the popularity or
Yeah,
those kind of aspects.
for sure.
Yeah. And what were you like as a kid? And I usually ask this from the perspective of how music relates to that, because for a lot of people it can be a sort of an escape, or something that if you're very introverted, or if you're not, if you don't have a ton of friends and find it difficult to relate to that kind of surrounding, usually music can be one of the answers of how you cope and maybe escape the real world. So what was that like for you?
I think it was, and maybe even still is, very important sort of coping mechanism or escape for me. Music, whether I'm listening or making it, they're almost equally important for me. And life, I mean, when you're a kid, stuff's tough, but even, you never get out of this feeling of like the world is weird and confusing. And definitely there were times where I wanted to take a break from it, or times that I just wanted to sort of shut the noise off in your brain a little bit. And music has always sort of been there as a tool, but also as just sort of a fascination. It's the only thing you can tell. I have, my brain is the type that I hop between interest and stuff like that. But music is the one thing that literally I've never gotten bored of. I never, like, there's always some people doing exciting stuff that truly excites me. And I love the change of music. I love new genres when they emerge. I love paying attention to new techniques. It's the never ending sort of it's like you'll never learn it all, and that's really exciting to me. Yeah, so when I was a kid, I definitely had a lot. I would listen either with headphones, or sometimes I could play it on a CD player, boombox, and I would just listen to music for hours and hours. And most of the time trying to do my homework, but not really doing my homework, just listening. And then, it was an escape for sure.
Yeah, I think now that I think about it, you mentioned the hopping from one thing to another. I think
Mhm.
I mean I'm sure there are many examples of how that can be turned into a positive, but certainly in creativity and certainly in music that can absolutely be harnessed, because there are many aspects in life where people where that can turn into a hindrance, and it will actually negatively impact your life. But
Mhm.
with music, you can sort of, do this one thing, take what you learn, take it to another, and just keep looping around with that, and
Mhm.
actually grow in the sort of the macro of getting better at music.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's probably a pretty important point to um, take away, and not in the sense that you're trying to yeah, how would you say it? Turn a like force a negative into a positive, but there's actually a lot of utility in realizing that, because I think a lot of people are hopping from one thing to another, and they're being called a loser, or someone who gives up, and someone who never sees it through. Not to say that that's not necessarily an issue, but
Mhm.
understanding that if you are a creative, you're seeking out new stimulus, and
Mhm.
you should probably be aware of that, and then harness that as something that maybe helps you learn and grow, and then do this music thing or whatever it is that you're doing better. Did you so you I know that you went to UCLA film scoring, the film scoring program.
Mhm.
When Before we sort of transition into that, was it always clear to you that you wanted to do A, something creative, or B, music, or was there a clear point where you realized that you wanted to do music for, as your profession, or what kind of a process was that?
So it was always clear that it was my primary interest. Like, if you had asked me, what do you spend the most time thinking about? Or if you had $50 disposable income, what would you spend that on? It would always be 100%. It would be something related to either a new CD or some way to make music in some new way. Um, I went to college near LA, so about an hour away from where I am. And it was not a music college. They had a few music programs. I took every type of music program that they offered, but I was majoring in more practical, more traditional college type stuff. And I was definitely overwhelmed. I think could feel that this was really the moment that I was trying really hard to care about the classes, and they were interesting, you know, as politics and stuff like that, things that I still think a lot about. I think we all do, but I didn't have a deep passion in it, and I couldn't fake it. I couldn't force it. I couldn't pretend to care about the authors whose paper I was writing about in that moment. So I only went to college, traditional college, for 2 years, and then, and I probably also was going through some, you know, it's overwhelming, I think, just in general, to be of that age and you be on your own, and people are partying, and you're probably not sleeping as much as you should, and all that kind of stuff. So I probably reached a point where I kind of was just mentally done, and all I cared about was music, and all I cared about at that moment was pretty much hip hop music, instrumental side of hip hop music at that moment. So I said, well, I dropped out of college, and I said, you know, I'll come back, quote unquote. I never did, to that college. And then I moved to New York. So I was 20 years old. I couldn't even drink. And I moved to New York on my own. I didn't know anybody. And I was working as a janitor at a bookstore. And then I started to work in a hip hop record label, a pretty famous one. It's called Fat Beat, or famous for that scene. It's called Fat Beats, and they also had a little record store as well. And that was really where I found, at least it was like, all of a sudden I was in a professional world, and I found people who actually cared about this type of, you know, nerding out in a very specific way, in exactly the same way that I did. So I found some really, really cool people, really special people while I was there. And I was able to work on some cool projects too, while I was there. So that was probably the moment. That was a big moment, because I sort of abandoned the traditional path that I think a lot of people take, which works well for a lot of people, but it just, I could see it was not gonna, didn't see a positive future if I was just to stay on it. And then I just started from a pretty weird place, no money, and, you know, nothing. But yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty. It can be very strange when you have this kind of complete lack of interest with the kind of the normal world, and then you can discover a group of people who share the same, you know, perspective towards life as you do, and it can really
Mhm.
be like a surreal experience. You're like, whoa, wait, these people exist. This stuff exists. So you were working this janitor job. I presume that's probably daytime for you.
Mhm.
And then are you doing stuff for the label in the afternoons or the nights, or
So
how did you make
yeah,
that balance work?
so I was a janitor for about a year, maybe a year and a half. And in that time, I started as an intern, and then they got me on a part time. And then they hired me. So then I was able to quit my janitor job. They hired me in the warehouse. So I was just shipping records all day, which was hard work because there was no uh, air conditioning or heater. So depending, and New York gets really hot in the summertime. And we were just carrying big, heavy boxes all day. Um, and then they also had a little record label on the same. It was like the warehouse it was all one floor, but the warehouse was on one side, and then they had sort of an office on the other side of the floor. So I sort of found I was able to sneak my way into some of their big meetings where they talked about uh you know, who they were going to sign, bands that they were going to sign, and whether they liked music and stuff like that. Uh and then I was able to start, you know, giving once I earned a little bit of, you know, at least like people could tell that I cared and I wasn't an idiot. So then I was able to give my 2 cents a little bit. And then I started to go out and find artists and stuff like that, and start to bring projects in myself. Um, Meanwhile, you know, and I was good. I've always been a good employee, because it's like, it's easy. Like, okay, you just do this, you just do this, you go, you know, this is how it works. And then and then I don't know, you don't get fired essentially. But meanwhile, I was wanting really badly to have more time to be making music. There was still that I was close to, I was around people that I really liked, and I was close to people who were doing really interesting creative works, but it wasn't me, and it wasn't me spending, I had very little of my own time to be doing that. So that became the new hurdle to overcome in that job. Yeah.
And what was your own musical ability at this stage? Either, in either the music tech side or the playing of any sorts. Where were you sort of standing in during that time?
I was a tinkerer, so I could fake my way. I spent some time in some recording studios around that time, so I could run Pro Tools and I could set up a microphone and I could, loosely make it sound medium. I mean, thought it was good, but hindsight, kind of embarrassing. But I could EQ a little bit and do a little bit of mixing and stuff like that. So I was kind of more on the engineering side of everything. And in terms of music, like I could still play, like sometimes I would play a little bit of piano or a little bit of synthesizer or something like that on some of the tracks that I was around. Um, but I wasn't very good. And I definitely, this was a major, this is about, we're talking about maybe 2004-ish, 2005-ish. And there was a major revolution that was happening in technology where people could increasingly record in their own bedroom or whatever. 3-5 years before that, you just literally you couldn't record. You would need to go to a studio essentially that had Pro Tools, that had a big, way to get multiple channels into Pro Tools and all that kind of stuff. So I actually held on for too long. One of my things that I wished I had done is learned on my own some of the recording techniques that were a little more advanced. And I kind of held out. I used the MPC and I used these traditional techniques for like maybe 2-3 years longer than I think I should have. So eventually I got comfortable really in front of a DAW and making music in a DAW. But that took longer than I wish it had, quite frankly. Yeah.
So you were now working for this label. You're kind of close to where you want to go, but not quite there. So what was the next step from there? How did you sort of advance from that position?
So the head of the label, who had founded the whole company, he was setting up his own little studio. He had like basically an empty office room at the end of the corner, and his dream was to set up a studio. So, and he was, more successful. So he had enough money to at least get some basic equipment in there. I sort of negotiated. I was ready to leave, and I felt the new burning urge that I just didn't have enough time to make music. And New York is expensive, so finding room and space where neighbors aren't yelling at you for playing your, speakers, is tough. It's hard to find. So I was about ready to leave, and then a friend of mine had just gotten a promotion, and he wanted me to take his spot. So he said that as a negotiating thing, he said basically that anytime the big boss man wasn't using the big studio, I could get a key and then I could use it. So most nights and weekends I was there for about a year and a half. And that was a big period of growth, because then I could bring in friends of mine who played instruments and we could record them, and I could get a little more comfortable with the DAW, and have nobody bother me, no neighbors yelling at me. So that was a really lucky position that I found myself in. But still, I didn't have enough time, and I wasn't really progressing the way I should. And the job was starting to get a little stressful, as most jobs can sometimes. So that was around the time that I decided I was going to leave New York, which was getting overwhelming, and come back to LA. so that was what I did then. Yeah.
You mentioned you negotiated yourself into that studio
Mm.
job, or
Mhm.
I don't know what the
Mhm.
title was, but
Yeah.
is negotiation something that you find yourself to be like innately good at, or was it tough on you, and if it was,
Yeah.
why?
I don't think I'm innately good at it. I think that what I am good at it is when I'm in a work type situation, I'm good at recognizing the work that needs to be done and getting it done. That's what I'm good at. And that's what I was doing there. And they needed somebody to fill a specific role. So then they were able to ask the right questions to me, like, why don't you want this new job? You're going to get a little more money. And I was basically, I need space to make music. And they're like, well, we do have this thing opening up. Maybe we can make that work. So it was almost like my friend was negotiating on my behalf because he really wanted me in that position. So, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful for him doing that. But no, I have negotiated decently in the past, but generally I'm more motivated by creativity and the project than other things to sometimes to a fault. From a negotiation perspective. But yeah.
Well, yeah, that tends to be the case with most creatives.
Mhm.
We don't really like or enjoy the any of the business
Mhm.
aspects, but I mean, in your case, it's a good example of how important it is to have people around you who know
Mhm.
how to do other things. And in this case, your friend kind of
Mhm.
negotiated, saw the vision which could
Mhm.
happen, and talked to you, all of you, into doing the outcome that he was looking for. So
Yeah.
that's also important, having the right people there. But it's negotiation is a massive part of this. Like, I'm sure, as you know now, as you do what
Mhm.
you do, you have to be very clear, and concise with how you communicate what it is that you do, because people want to know things like price,
Mhm.
schedule, etc. And without those things, you can't be professional. And if you're not professional, then nobody serious is going to want to work with you. So
Mhm.
you have to figure that out. So you go back to LA at this point. Is this
Mhm.
where UCLA comes into the picture, or was there still
Yeah.
something in between?
Well, there was actually a few years in between. So I was making music under a pseudonym, which I don't really put public these days.
Don't want
But
to put it out there.
yeah, no, not right now. But I was
Too many
making
big
music.
hits, and
No huge hits, but it was I got moderate buzz around certain circles and stuff like that. And I was doing a little bit of performing, and I was also working, various odd jobs and stuff like that. But I was doing a little bit of performing, and this is about when I started to think, I was really asking myself some pretty tough questions. This is late 2000s, and the music industry had changed drastically in the past decade that I was really paying attention to it closely. So, streaming was there, YouTube was there, nobody was really buying CDs anymore, Spotify was everywhere. Um, I had to ask myself some really tough questions about basically what longevity did I see in terms of being a professional musician, and how, and basically the answer was either I become more of a performing artist, which I didn't have that much interest in doing, um, or I started to get more into the music that gets essentially synchronized music that gets used in or is made directly for media products. So whether it's TV or movies or video games. And I had never really, I mean, I love that music, of course. I grew up listening to that and paying attention. I had albums that I liked, but I never really thought deeply about, could I be a composer? Could I write, this type of music, and what would that sound like? But this is when I was sort of coming to terms with that. And I was also, I was thinking about who are musicians in their 50s, 60s, 70s who are still working on exciting projects, and the answer that kept coming up was film composers. Film composers, sometimes their best years are very late in their life. So that, from a longevity perspective, was enticing, and I thought that I could sort of establish some roots and try really hard to play sort of a longer game in that world. And I was relatively late coming to it. I know there are, high school students now that are learning media composition, and then they go to film music school, and and they're 18 years old learning things that I was a decade older beginning to learn. But that's when UCLA Extension started to get in. And that's also roughly around the time that I started to intern and then be an assistant for some film composers around Los Angeles. So I found myself, I like to be in rooms where people are doing cool stuff, and whatever way I can push myself and find myself in that room, that I'm gonna, at least at that point, I would try to do. So that's what I did then as well.
So you were, if I understood this correctly, you were an intern for a composer before you went into UCLA.
It was around the same time. I don't really remember what came first, but it was the same period that I was interested. I switched my sights pretty drastically into media composition. So, yeah.
Was that something you had? Was it like a very strategic choice to go into media composition, or did you have some sort of innate passion or drive for that medium?
It was more the passion. It was more that I started to. I mean, there was definitely a bit of a strategic where, beyond just sort of I was feeling burnt out by trying to make a living selling music. And I just didn't. And I needed to keep making music. It's not really strategic. It's more like survival. I needed to keep making music somehow, and in a way that people were actually generating some moderate amount of income. And I just sort of was trying anything I could to figure out where that world would be. And then the moment I started to be like, maybe this is it, that's when I just became obsessed with it creatively. I was like, so it wasn't, I mean, yes, there's, we all have bills to pay. There was a little bit of motivation of just like, I gotta pay rent. But then the moment I sort of touched on it, then I just took over my creative life, and I was very obsessed and passionate, and still am. Yeah.
And were your personal like, who did you look up to? Was it more like film composers, or did you hear any video game music that you loved? What was the stuff you were sort of looking at?
Yeah. It was mostly film composers. So, the legendary ones, John Williams, and obviously Hans Zimmer, it looms large in that world. With John Carpenter, I was very obsessed with John Carpenter music because I've always liked synthesizers, and I liked the simplicity of the way that he did everything. And then in terms of video game, I didn't get truly obsessed with video games. It might have been the Tron. There was a Tron game that came out around the time that movie came out. This is maybe 2012, so around that, maybe 2013. I really like that soundtrack a lot. And that was, again, very synthy. And then I started to pay more attention to like horror games and sci-fi games and stuff like that. And then So, oh, you know what else was Austin Wintory put out Journey. That was a big, when I heard that, a friend of mine who works on Destiny right now, writes music for Destiny. We went to a little gathering of composers in Los Angeles, and Austin Wintory was showing Journey and showing before the game had ever come out. And it was like, wow, you can get this level of creativity and nuance and emotion and passion into a game. That definitely opened my eyes pretty wide. Yeah.
Sounds like it sort of gave you permission to exert art into that medium. Maybe
Yeah.
did you have like a strong preconception or an idea that music for games needs to be like purely functional?
Yeah. Yeah. I sort of thought it was either, the most sort of cartoony, Mario type stuff, or it's just going to be all, hyper, um, trailer music, essentially, just big, and that's it. End of story. Um, and once I realized that there was a whole world of nuance in the middle of those two big poles, Oh, you know what else came out around that time was the Last of Us soundtrack came out around that time, and the first game, and that was a really special soundtrack, and that definitely turned video game music on its head in terms of like, this is an action game, this is a zombie game, but meanwhile the music is so personal and touching and just close. You feel like you're right next to the guitar when you listen to it. That was a big one too for me. Yeah.
When did that first one come out? Do you remember?
I want to say 2012 or 2013. That would be my guess, but I don't really know.
Um, yeah, I could try and look it up. 2013 looks like.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yep. Cool. Was that so um do you want to go first to the intern thing or the UCLA? Your choice. Doesn't
Uh,
matter.
Either I
Okay,
guess the
cool.
intern thing. Yeah.
Intern stuff. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you don't have to mention any names of who you worked for, etc. But what was that what was that experience like? Like in terms of your um, compositional growth? Like, did you learn music theory? Did you learn its practical application? Did you learn arrangement, orchestration, or what about the technical side of it? What was that experience like?
Yeah. So I worked for a number of composers. I'm probably not going to say most of their names, but the one that I will shout out is a guy named Jeff Rona. And he's a really incredible composer. He's been around. He actually was on the original MIDI, like basically organization when they were developing MIDI. So he
Nice.
really knows his,
OG.
yeah, real
What?
OG.
So it's Jeff Brona?
Jeff Rona. Yeah.
Oh,
And around that time, he was working on God of War 3, Rona.
okay,
So
yeah.
really incredible composer. He worked with Hans Zimmer for a while in I think the 90s, maybe late 80s to the 90s. And he is a really nice guy, and he was able to foster and still is, and it still has I'm friends with him, and I work with some of his employees as well. He's able to foster a really creative atmosphere, where it feels like there's always something happening, something new. We're also finishing something. It doesn't feel, I mean, there are times, of course, where you have to work pretty hard, but it doesn't feel like it's like you're in a factory, music just cranking stuff out. It's just, it never feels like that. It feels like everything is done with intention. So that was definitely working in his studio was definitely big for me, and it was mostly the information that you pick up, like that nobody would ever tell you to pay attention to. The way that you set up files on your computer, or the way that, when you're writing violins, like a subtle decision. Why did he make this decision instead of that? Just little tiny things that no teacher would ever tell you about, because they're so small. They seem insignificant, but they add up to build a much larger and more important sort of picture and intention. They show a level of intention behind the small decisions. Those were what I picked up a lot of in a short amount of time. And pretty quickly, the other thing is that even though I was in college, I was in UCLA Extension at that time, he immediately was just asked me to do pretty advanced stuff that I had never done. And so a lot of learning on the job, but I like that. So it was, orchestration and mixing and doing MIDI instruments and sample libraries and all that kind of stuff. I just immediately was either expected to know how to do somehow, or was able to watch someone else do it in front of me and then be expected to do it the second time after I watched it one time. So yeah, that was a good experience for sure. And we worked on some cool projects around that time as well. Yeah.
In those situations where you had to pick up something really fast,
Mhm.
again, do you feel like you have an innate ability for that, or was picking up things fast like a skill or a skill set that you needed to learn to sort of keep up with the pace? And if it was that, how did you if you could break it down,
Yeah.
that would be great.
That's a good question. I do think when it comes to technical stuff on the computer, I think I'm pretty good just at picking stuff up. And this is not to say it was easy, or I didn't make a lot of mistakes. Like, I did. In terms of like learning, I would say my number one skill was just, my number one thing that I leaned on was just being confident in my ability to figure it out, whatever it might be. So if you asked me to, let's say we have an orchestral score, and he asks me to take the violins and separate them in a way so that this part is on its own sheet of paper. Okay. And I had never used the software before, and I barely knew why the violin needed to be on a separate sheet of paper, but that's what he asked. So, and then I usually would have, like, let's say an hour and a half, and I would Google it. I would read the help menu. I would just click buttons, make the wrong mistakes and save it as a copy so I didn't mess up the original, and basically just figure out, okay, well, if I needed to separate it, and this would be the step, and just kind of go step by step. Sort of, I think the main skill is take these big problems into digestible, small little things. So you have this, so that what I'm not actually talking about is a small thing, but we imagine that he needed to take 30 songs and transform all of them in very specific ways. And that can be really overwhelming. But you start with just saying, okay, well, the first song, all we need to do is we need to take the violin and we need to bring it into a different file in a certain way. So let's just do that and learn how to do that. And then the second song, we need to do similar thing with cello, but you already know sort of how to do that, but with one new step added to there. So then you do the same work. You try it and then get it, and just kind of move through it. So I would say that what I'm good at is trying until I get it right, and not being afraid to do something when I don't completely know what I'm doing.
Did you have any past, like, was that something you already knew going into it, or did you sort of realize with this big workload that I need to just break it down into chunks that I can do one by one? Was that a lesson you learned already before getting into it, or was it something you figured out during the process?
I don't know. I don't know when I imagine it was something that I figured out just kind of practically. This is the challenge that's in front of me. I'm entrusted with this task, and it's not life or death, but also people are relying that it gets done. So what is the quickest way for me to get from right now into that task being done and me not knowing how to get there, and just kind of faking my way through, or just figuring it out every step of the way. I think it was more like I couldn't imagine doing it in any like I didn't ask people because I didn't want to bother them. They had their own stuff, so I couldn't really ask. I just figured it out. Yeah.
And well, I don't particularly like the saying "fake it till you make it," and I feel like that's partly what I sensed in there. Like you almost said it
I
in that
know, and I
sentence,
caught
but you,
myself because I don't like that
yeah.
phrase either.
But
Yeah.
that's, I think, super interesting about you is to is to notice that, because it's not, you were obviously put into a position and a job that was slightly beyond your current skill set level,
Mhm.
which
Correct.
is frankly ideal.
Mhm.
You want to be in that position,
Mhm.
but there's also a lot of stress related to that, and you have to
Mhm.
tolerate that, and you have to rise to the occasion. And like you said, simply break it down into chunks that you can manage, and
Mhm.
as you manage many of these tasks over time, you're going to grow as a result of that. So I'm not going to ask, how do you deal with the faking till you making it? But there are a lot of people out there who are looking for, let's say, similar jobs to what
Mhm.
you did as an intern there, and they are facing a lot of tasks and challenges that they haven't faced yet. And I think
Mhm.
this is in part a big problem that my generation, and probably the ones that have come after that, I don't know, I can't really speak for that, but certainly my generation struggles with, is this idea that you can't go into something unless you already master something.
Mhm.
You shouldn't even put yourself in jobs that are beyond your um, skill level, or your skill set, but it's going to be really difficult to grow unless you do that to some capacity. And also, it's a mindset that comes from a place of fear,
Mhm.
because you don't want to face failure, micro failure, and you don't
Mhm.
want to put yourself in a position where somebody might be disappointed in you, etc. I mean, this opens an entire Pandora's box of millennial issues. But
Mhm.
uh, in terms of that I mean, you touched on that a bit already in terms of how you were breaking it down. But how did you struggle to cope with the mental aspect of doing something that you weren't completely ready for? I mean, I get a sense that you're pretty calm in these situations, and you can logically break it down and attack it. But I'm sure some, maybe, anxiety or pressure at the very least was involved. So first of all, did
Oh
you
yeah.
feel that, and how did you mentally deal with that, if at all?
Yeah. So for me, the way it normally comes about is when I don't feel like I have enough time. And I know we never really feel like we have enough time to do whatever task is in front of us because we all want more time. But I usually have a pretty good gauge of like, okay, this thing would normally take me 3 hours, but you're asking me to do it in 45 minutes. That's the only time, those are the times that I get actually stressed because I know I'm gonna make mistakes. That you can't, like, there's no way not to make mistake. And I don't like doing something either half-assed or just poorly. So those are the moments, because that's when I'm really out, external pressures are forcing me into a box where I know it's designed for me to fail, right? Those are the times that it can get to me a bit emotionally. But most of the time I'm able to keep it, under wraps, or allow myself, does like, you want it in 45 minutes. Like, what happens if I give it to you tomorrow morning before you even show up to work? It's like, let's try to find a way, and I'll just stay up all night, but I'll even have time to take a rest and get a little more energy. Then I'll have time to do it right. That's usually how I would handle those types of situations. Not a crazy, let's just, give me overnight, but the moment you walk in, it'll be ready on your desk. But yeah. And then, the real stress of anything creative and any musician, for me at least, is the bigger one, which is, how am I going to pay rent, and how am I going to build a career, and is this, whatever gig I'm on right now, is this going to be the last one? That's where my true anxieties lie, usually. Not the work in the moment. I'm usually pretty good at doing, but the bigger one, that's where the existential fear comes in.
Yeah, cool. I will probably loop back to that maybe later on, but you, when it comes to Jeff, because you mentioned he sort of cultivated this good atmosphere and managed people in that sense really well. That sounds similar to me from what I've heard of Hans. Being very good with people and selling his vision, etc. Do you think it's something that he picked up from Hans, or did he work for Hans because he had that ability innately, or what do you think happened there?
It's probably a little bit of both. I think that he's a personable guy. Most people who meet him walk away liking him personally. And I have heard horror stories about certain composers who leave Hans Zimmer's studio, and in my opinion, they learn the wrong lesson, which is, to them, they learn that every musical note or every decision that we're making is life or death. And if someone around me makes the smallest they basically run it like a military or something. You make the smallest mistake, then there's all hell to pay. And in my opinion, it's not just that that's bad for the people around you to be on edge and fearful of their work. In my opinion, it's bad ultimately for the music. It's bad ultimately for the job. Like, people, I don't, and I understand the mentality that people are going to, perform better if they're fearful to not mess up. Like, I get that that's where that comes from, but I just don't buy it. And I think it's a much stronger thing to cultivate a sense of safety, security, and not that we're not working hard, and not that, people, when you mess up, you still need to, have a little bit of a communication session so everybody understands why it was a mistake, and hopefully it doesn't happen again, and so on. But I think that that's a much, not just better personally, but creates a better product and makes the client happier at the end of the day. So I don't know, if Jeff, I know that there was definitely some practices that Jeff took from Hans Zimmer in working with that. But I also have a feeling that he very willfully decided to abandon certain practices, and willfully decided that I don't want to run things the way I had to run them because now I'm in control and I don't want to recreate what was really bad for me when I was there. And this is just me speculating. I haven't heard anything. I'm just guessing. I don't want anybody to write any articles. I'm just guessing here. But that's my suspicion in terms of
Yeah,
that.
and it's
Yeah.
it reminds me of what Harry is it Gregson Williams? Is that
Mhm.
his name? Yes. He said that same thing. He doesn't want to be a mini Hans Zimmer. He wants to do his own thing, and that's precisely what I think everybody should be doing. If you, it's awesome that you are not only lucky enough, but obviously people work hard to get to the position where they can work for someone like Hans. But
Mhm.
the goal isn't to be the next Hans Zimmer, because you can't be that. Nobody can be anything else ultimately than what they are, or they risk becoming just a kind of a poor replica of something, and then by definition you can't be creative anymore. You'll just be like a bad replication of something else. But yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
what you said about fear is very true. I think there are some people who can sort of channel it and funnel it into the right place, but
Mhm.
I'd say for the majority of people, fear will block creativity, because fear is about survival. And when
Mhm.
you're just trying to survive, it's very difficult to be creative, because you're simply thinking about the essentials of what you need, breathing, etc., but just getting out of this position instead of getting into it, which is what
Mhm.
creativity demands. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
if you had to look at what Jeff did with people in terms of cultivating that good atmosphere, if you had to break it down to maybe like the most essential component, or maybe if you can mention a few, that's fine as well. But what is it that he actually did to achieve that? Because these can be very elusive and intangible things to a lot of people. It's the main thing is that you walk away from somebody and they they made you feel good. But
Mhm.
what are the practical things that you think he did?
So there's two things that I think he did really well and still does really well. One thing is he always, when people are around and it's lunchtime or dinner time, he will make some sort of a carry out order or delivery order, and he'll invite everybody to enjoy the meal, and he will encourage people to take the whatever 30-40 minutes that went after the food comes and actually just sit there and eat it, even if there's work to be done. And I think that those moments that seem, I mean, insignificant, I mean, from a time perspective, maybe it's better that I eat in front of my, and of course we did that a little bit, but maybe it's better if I eat in front of my desk and work. But he would say, no, we're all just gonna enjoy our meal. And I think that a lot of just camaraderie, a lot of walls were broken down, just a lot of, it's breaking bread with people that are around you. And so that's a very practical thing that I think fostered a lot of goodwill with him and everybody who was working for him and with him. Um, the other thing that he did was he would give people shots, and it would be little, it would be small, but he would say, like, I'm working on the, and some, I have a feeling that there are things that maybe he didn't really want to do just because he was kind of bored of it or whatever. But he'd be like, hey, can you add the strings to this part, and obviously if it was bad he wouldn't use it, but he would just leave for the afternoon, and then he would let someone random just touch his music, which I know some people would be very precious about, but and then he would show up in the morning, and if it was good enough to use, he would just keep it in there. And those were little moments where he was, to some, on one level, he's sort of testing you a little bit, but really, I think he's giving you a shot, and he's saying, like, here's a little window, like, let's see what you can do. And if you did a good job, he would tell you, good work, sounds really good. Uh, Simple stuff, doesn't cost him any money to do that, but it brings a level of trust, and it shows that he's acknowledging the humanity of the people who are around him, even if they've never, done that before. He'll give them a little shot, in a way that if they mess up, it's not the end of the world. Nobody's going to yell at them.
When he
Yeah.
first said shot, I thought he would grab a bottle of vodka and it's like,
well, he would do. There was a little bit of alcohol consuming, but no. I give him a chance to maybe do something nice and maybe participate in the project in a positive way.
yeah. If you work here, you got to drink every day.
Yeah. I
No,
mean, yeah, for sure.
those are both super powerful. Obviously, I mean the power of food, and like you said, sharing that with people, that's a super, super deep bonding thing for most. And the other one is, I think, pure genius, because it's like a win-win thing in every single regard. You give people an opportunity, and that obviously makes them feel good, and they learn, and maybe you get a good part out of it. But even if you don't, the cost is absolutely nothing. You just press delete, and that's it.
That's right.
So that's really, really solid. Going into the UCLA stuff, what was that experience like? How did you probably had some expectations going into that, and how did the reality meet that expectation?
So after a few years after I was doing this intern stuff, and I'll come back to the UCLA in just 1 second. I started to teach for a bachelor's program in music composition for doing a lot of this type of stuff. So this was at the Musicians Institute. And so I was then all of a sudden I was on the other side of I was the teacher, and I had a bunch of young, 18, 19-year-olds there, some of which who were really, really passionate about what we were learning, and some who kind of were there for whatever, a variety of reasons. They found themselves in this situation, and maybe that's not really where their heart was. For me, when I was taking those classes at UCLA, they were exactly what I wanted to be learning. They were precisely what I needed. So I was ecstatic, and I consider those classes to be really invaluable in terms of giving me hands-on experience working with real musicians, working with real string players and choirs and stuff like that. And I was writing music almost every week. I had to write a new, pretty long song. So it was just a lot of, the pace was up. And there I learned, and I met other students who cared a lot. So for me, it was a very, very valuable experience. With that said, I've heard negative stuff. I've heard some people who go there and they're not, maybe like some of my other students, they're just not ready for it. It's not where their heart is at. And they're not getting much out of it. So that's not good. And then the flip side is I hear students who maybe they'll go to a brilliant university conservatory and in a different country, and then they'll decide, I'm going to go to Los Angeles and I'm going to learn in Hollywood, and then they'll go to this program and they've already learned 80% of it, and they might have a negative experience there too. So for me, it was precisely what I needed to learn. It was I could read music, but I had never written for an orchestra. I didn't understand, a lot about orchestration and a lot about strings and stuff like that. And that's what I wanted to learn. And then I took, conducting. I took a video game class. I took about, how to write for a choir, all sorts of very niche things. And they were quick, it would be about maybe 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that per class. And you'd get a whole lot of hands-on experience, and then you'd move on. So yeah, I liked it a lot. I got a lot out of it.
Did you what about the the social aspect of it? Did you use that time to make a lot of connections either with peers or teachers or the staff?
Yeah, as best I could. I still have some friends that I met in that program, and some of the teachers were, you know, were very helpful, and some of them were, sort of renowned in certain ways in film composition and stuff like that. So I got to meet some living legends, which was really special. Um, but yeah, and so yeah, the social, the social aspect was good too. It's nice to be around other people that care about the thing that you happen to care about in that moment. So I got to experience that for sure.
Yeah. So what happens after the thing is done? Do you sort of transition into entrepreneurship right after that, or was there
No.
some stepping stones?
Yeah, so I worked under some other composers besides Jeff, and some of them, you know, these were real working composers. These were people who just sort of like, non-sexy projects, might be a documentary or something on, public TV, or, some Nickelodeon show or something, cartoon, just very, not really high profile stuff, but we're working hard. And a lot of them were really good at what they did. Their Some of these people, their environment was not as comfortable for me to be around in terms of some of the stuff we were talking about with Jeff and his setup. So I didn't have the best experience with some of these people, and I spent at least a few years sort of being definitely underpaid for the work that I was doing, and just not really feeling appreciated, but also just not really feeling like I was growing, which is also like I'll be underpaid if I feel like I'm growing, but I didn't feel it was both, Um, so then after a certain amount of time, then I decided I'm going to be, just like you said, entrepreneur. And those were maybe the darkest few years of my life. After I stopped, I decided, there was a little bit of ego. In hindsight, I probably could have gone to some other composers who were a bit nicer, including maybe Jeff. I could have transitioned in a bit safer of a way, but I made this big proclamation. I'm done working. I'm going to just get jobs on my own. And for a long time, they just didn't come. So I just that did everything I could to keep the lights on and to keep the rent paid, and to figure it out on my own. And then that around that period is when I got the teaching job at the college, which was a nice, very important lifeline for me to, again, like I'm saying, just keep just a few days a week, 2 days a week, I'd be teaching. And it was usually just barely enough to cover my baseline expenses. And then I taught, I've taught there for probably about 10 years, up through the pandemic. It was just about a year or two ago that I stopped teaching there. But then that's when I started to think a little more entrepreneurially, a little more about building my own business, and not just me as like selling, it's hard to sell yourself as a product, I found. I think maybe some people are better at this than me, but I'm not great at that. So I would be Adam Fligsten, the composer, hire me. And it would be like, well, why? And, or who are you? And, that was a tough hurdle for me. It's easier for me to say, this is the company. It's not just me. I have other people. These are a list of services that we do and that we've done in the past. People seem to like it when we do that. Like, to me, that's an easier thing than just, I am a composer who writes music. It's easier to wrap my head around the pitch of that, which is probably one of the reasons why I started the company.
How did you well, first of all, I guess, is business something that comes naturally to you, or again, is it something you had to learn completely, from the ground up?
Yeah, it is definitely not something that comes naturally to me. You know, it's a, I have some friends who are composers, but they also happen to be very good business people, and they're successful, and it works out for them. And I really do admire them for that. I have to work pretty hard at it. I have to think pretty carefully. I have to not get frustrated. There are, there are times when I just get overwhelmed. The business part of it is probably the most overwhelming, and it has always been for me personally. And I've brought on employees, I've brought on people who work for me to try to relieve the burden to some degree, and sometimes that works moderately well. But most of the time, it's just a matter of growing up, sucking it up to some degree, getting a little bit better, reading books and trying to learn from other people, but mostly just sort of figuring it out and trying to be, my main rule is you try to be generally good to the people that are around you, even if it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're ever going to give you a job or not. It doesn't matter. Just try to be generally good to the people around you and hope that somewhere, somehow that's going to help your business. Yeah.
Has there been, I mean, I know you said you sort of just like figure it out and through the process learn it, but has there been have there been any key lessons that you've had to learn about business? If you had to sort of, I don't know, find some key cornerstones. I don't know if that makes any sense as a sentence, but
Yeah. Sure.
yeah, any key elements that you've learned. And I think it doesn't need to be like a, and I'm asking because obviously musicians or creatives of any sort, they need to learn how to monetize their work, or find somebody who can do that for them. But even when you're doing that, you need to understand what you're getting yourself into, because unfortunately it is often the case that people are taken advantage of, and slimy business people give you very hollow promises and take too much money. And so even for that reason, it's important to understand business so that you can make an educated decision about getting a business partner involved, and that it makes sense to you. Or then in many cases, do it yourself. So from that perspective, has there been, these being a creative, being a musician, being somebody to whom business doesn't come naturally, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned?
Okay. So there's two maybe that I'll touch on. One that I'm really trying to get better at, which is you need to really learn what you're selling, and like what I was saying, if I'm Adam Fligsten, the composer, you need to learn what is it that makes you special, and in a way that is easy to tell somebody else, easy to digest. And you can tell that the way my brain works, I like hopping between genres. I like working on projects that are drastically different. I'll work on a horror thing and then I'll work on a happy, fun comedy. And I like that. I enjoy that. So, but that is not really, that's counterintuitive from selling yourself as something.
And
So
especially very difficult to understand for non-creative people.
yeah,
Like,
totally.
let's say you are like running a video game company, and you're doing like the management stuff. If you're not a creative yourself, that doesn't make any sense to you. So
yeah,
but sorry,
absolutely. No, yeah, totally. So learning how to, and a lot of it is intrapersonal work, which I probably, when I was in my 20s, I probably just literally did not have the mental capability to even decide if the big question, it's scary, it's sort of scary question, if you could only write one genre of music or whatever, one type of movie or one type of game for the rest of your life, what would that thing be? And so a way of sort of saying like I just said, I could do horror, I could do comedy, but do I think that if I put all of my focus into comedy, would I then eventually be one of the best comedy composers in the world? Like, is that something that I truly think I was excel at? And for me, the answer is no, probably not. That's not really where my brain goes. So, and this is still a process that I think I am not doing as good of a job as I should. So I'm trying to get better at this. But I believe on one level, you need to kind of be able to competently do a lot of what comes your way. So you need to be a bit of a generalist in terms of professionalism, but then you need to be a sort of a specialist in terms of like, where are you actually one of the best in the world? Where's the zone that people, if some project comes your way, they're like, oh, we got to hire that person because they're the person for that. So that I think is the one big thing that I'm still trying to get better at. I'm still trying to define for myself and for my company. And it's always changing a little bit, but I think it's changing less than it would have 5 years ago or 8 years ago. What is the main thing that you are selling? What is the main, not just like, I'm good, hire me, but what is the real practical, tangible thing that people are going to want you for? So that's the first lesson that I think everybody should be thinking pretty hard about. The other one, gosh, I lost my train of thought a little bit. I actually forgot what the other one is. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine. I mean, if he comes back to you, let me know. But
Sure.
what would you say is that thing for you or for silent audio? Yeah.
So I think that I am a technology person. I think that I can get really, I think in terms of like new sounds, in terms of electronic or sounds that are just coming out in 2024, I'm pretty good at joining in and jumping in and thriving in stuff that is brand new. That's something that I thrive at. So definitely when it comes to electronic music, I'm pretty strong at, or I'm quite strong at that. You know, to some degree, I'm good at marrying what they call hybrid, marrying orchestral with electronic. I definitely think that I'm quite strong at that, although there's a lot of other great composers out there who are good at that. But when it comes to like taking music and getting as technology focused as possible, whether we're talking about programming or we're talking about just the sounds that are very, very hyper modern, that's where I'm probably I could swing with some of the best out there in the business for sure. And from a company perspective, it's similar. It's similar, but a little different. We are a technology music / audio company. We're mostly music. We mostly spend our time with the hyper technologically advanced side of music in games. So we do a lot of complex music manipulation in a game context. And sound design similarly, but then we also do some programming. And anyway, it's just really about the nerdy technology side of music. That's where we thrive, I think. If that makes sense. I could do better. This is what I'm trying to get a better little
Yeah.
succinct answer for.
Yeah. I mean, my follow-up would be like, how
Mhm.
do you currently communicate that to your clients? Is it through branding? Is it, obviously you have a lot of audio examples that you can play to them, or does it sort of go deeper to the level of relationship building that people begin to understand who it is that you are, and how do you communicate that to people?
So you remember I thought of the other thing that I
Okay, well, you can
so
go to that. We can.
no, I'll answer your question first, and then I'll jump to that because they're connected. Ultimately, it's about relationships for me. I mean, obviously, having an online presence is important, and if I had more time and more resources at my disposal, I would probably spend more time on our website and my own personal website, and I probably would make more video content and moving content and stuff like that, because I think that stuff is really important. But fundamentally, what it really comes down, we could spend the next 6 months worrying about every pixel of our website, and I don't think that would be worth, one afternoon with a person who happens to work on a cool game. To me, it's really about relationships. It's really just about interpersonal connections between people, and just sort of being a person that people like to be around, and being a person that people would entrust with their baby, would feel like you're not going to mess it up. You're going to, you might be creative, and you might have a vision, and I have a vision, and we're going to be able to work on that. And we're going to find a unified vision that is really just better than what either of us could do on our own. And sort of, convincing people that you are, worthy of their trust in that kind of a way. To me, that's everything. So along those lines, what I was going to say, very connected, one business thing in the audio space that I have found is, and this was a mistake that I made a lot when I was younger, to not see other people who do what you do as competitors. Like, you are not Coca-Cola and they're not Pepsi. And to think of it in that kind of a way is just a complete, you're just only going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're just going to hurt your career. I had one teacher at UCLA Extension that said, don't hang out with other composers because they're your competition. Hang out with filmmakers or whatever. And I understand why he was saying that. I mean, of course, it makes sense broadly, because filmmakers are going to be the person who hires you to write music for their film. But I also think he's wrong. I just think he's flat out wrong. And most of the best projects I've ever been a part of came in some way or another from other composers who, they entrusted me, and they recommended me, or they just thought that they weren't going to be able to do the job well enough, or it was a collaboration where we both worked on it together. So I really think that you need to be kind to people around you, and you need to not see this. It's hard because sometimes, bills have to get paid, but you can't see this as a cutthroat kind of dog eat dog kind of business, because that's only going to hurt you in the long run. And people aren't going to want to be around you, and they're not going to want to work with you if you treat them like a means to an end.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that I've observed, that absolutely is how things are done at the highest level. It's fundamentally the scarcity versus abundance mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing tells me faster that you really don't maybe write from a creative place is if you think the pie is fixed. Because like there are many situations and realities where obviously if there's one job and two or more people are applying, only one is going to get that job. But as composers, like, I refuse to compete with anything other than my individuality. Like, if somebody is looking to hire a composer and they're choosing between me and you, I like they should be making that choice based on how you write music, and putting all of the eggs in that basket, because they want something creatively from you, and I can't write what you can, and vice versa. I mean, obviously if you can, then we're probably talking about a level that is sort of what would be the word for that? Trivial. Like, if a lot of people can do it, then it's very, very likely that it's not very complex, it's not very unique, and it's sort of very what's the word? Sort of template stuff, just very generic
Yes.
material. And if you get a job over me, I only see that as a celebration, because I will assume that they actually wanted your music for that project. And
That's right.
that's great. And also people, and again, I agree 100% with you, but having good relationships with people, let's say, there are a bunch of composers out there who can't take all of the work coming their way.
Mhm.
And their client is going to ask, well, do you know anybody who could do this for me? And guess who they're going to recommend? It's going to be someone they know, someone they trust, someone, obviously they need to see you as a compatible element with that project. But people do make the good go around as well. So and again, if people like you, they want to recommend you forward. So yeah, it's this and anybody who does this way, who build relationships and treat people properly and have this abundance mindset, and also see, like, if we work together we can create more of this good stuff. Anybody who does that reaps the benefits of that. But to get to that point, you have to move past the ego. You have to move past the fear, because you have to stop thinking about, oh, they're trying to take mine, so I have to protect everything I have with everything I've got. And also, like, the ego component is, oh no, Adam got this project over me, and that must mean I'm horrible and I'm shit. And obviously that's, you can that line of thinking can continue very far into dark depths, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. And also, like, one of the things, this is what I also have struggled with a lot, because to me, as a composer, I can write in a lot of genres, and that can be super tough to communicate to clients. And obviously, probably one of the best ways of doing that is to actually have audio examples of music in that genre, and preferably like a project example if possible. But what I try and communicate more than anything else is how I do things, because for me, it's pretty trivial whether this soundtrack is like a chip tune orchestral mix versus a hybrid, very actionable, something action oriented with the big orchestral epic hybrid sound. I can do all of those things, but it's what kind of life do you breathe into it? What is the actual compositional substance like? That's what I try and communicate, and I find that it's only certain types of clients who are creatives themselves who understand that. So is that something do you specifically or specially seek out those types of clients? Or, first of all, they're probably more rare than the other types, but do you seek them out? And what's the difference between the experience of working with like a very, let's say, creative game designer who understands these types of things versus somebody who comes maybe from a bigger company who's more of like a managerial type?
I've been wrestling with that a lot recently. It's a big question. And some of my friends who do similar work as my company, they have branded themselves as much more as, we are business services. We are, of course we're creative, but we're going to provide a clean product to you. And that's kind of the avenue that they've taken. And I think there's some value to that, because a lot of their clients are that in reverse. They're sort of mirroring who their clients are on the other side. They are a video game manager, of some kind, and they want to know that they can just, write a check and then in a certain amount of time have the appropriate assets sort of come back to them. That's what they're looking for. And I do wonder, because I would much prefer work with people who care about the art of their product, and I would much rather work on projects that are truly driven by a vision of some kind. So I've always branded myself as that, and my company has a tagline: "Audio for Creative Minds." So sort of saying, like, we're here to foster your creativity. That's the goal. But am I turning off business manager type people when I do that? I don't know. I might be. And there are definitely times, sometimes business is booming and sometimes business goes a little quiet, and that's when you start to ask yourself some of these more scary questions about, are you making the right decision? Did you go in the right direction? And all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't really know the right answer. I'm trying to figure that out at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it fundamentally seems to me like it's like a different industry altogether.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
working with just a kind of big faceless company who,
Mhm.
you're dealing with some kind of a manager who just needs some music in the game, and they have a very general idea of what it is that they need, and they have certain standards that in terms of again, this goes into the conversation of I have this theory that most people um, mainly listen to what music sounds like
Mhm.
versus the actual notes underneath. And
Mhm.
I do think the notes underneath speak to everyone, but
Mhm.
there are very varying degrees to which they speak to people. And
Mhm.
I believe music models meaning. And I think people have varying degrees of, first of all, identifying patterns and meaning. And then there's a different degree to which they can detect meaning through uh, the abstraction of music, how harmony or rhythm or melody comes together to speak about uh, meaning. But it's a very different thing to sell yourself as a composer to somebody who understands that and who gets goosebumps when they hear this or that, and they get that from the underlying composition, versus somebody who basically only understands the general impression that comes out of speakers. It's kind of the
Mhm.
sonic imprint. It's kind of like some kind of a 2D sculpture of, yeah, that sounds like EDM to
Mhm.
me, or that sounds
Mhm.
like reggae, but it's more
Right.
about identifying the sound, which
Mhm.
most people are really good at doing. It's something that people
Mhm.
innately just have. But
Yeah.
anything that differs from what they expect, they immediately put it in the trash bin because they can't recognize it. That's really the problem for them. So yeah, I mean, you're dealing with a very different type of a client. It's either a creative collaboration, or you're trying to, at the very least, deliver a product that at the surface level ticks the boxes. It makes them say, yeah, this sounds like epic orchestral video game hybrid music. That's
Mhm.
not to say it can't be creatively fantastic underneath, but in terms of getting the paycheck, you have to deliver this surface level crust that is the correct frequency profile of an
Mhm.
audio file.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
very, very, very different projects.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough to know how to, it's about branding. It's about selling yourself, and it's tough to, and who your client actually is. Like what you're saying, is the client just some sort of, business sort of person just trying to fill a hole, or are they someone who is deeply passionate. I like to believe that most people, even in video games, even if they are a producer, a manager, or something like that, still on some level they found themselves there because of some love, because of some core emotional passion or desire that's gotten them there. That's my belief. That's my driving belief. But I don't know. Maybe that's not always true.
And to be clear, I also, cling on to that belief as well. Or at the very least, for me, there's the desire to dig through all of that other stuff and go to their heart and soul and maybe make them feel something, despite
Yeah.
all of these other demands that they have to impose upon the music. But fight all of the other stuff that you don't find to be as essential, and still make them feel something. And yeah, like I said, it should, even if who you're working with do not see or understand the essence of what you're trying to bring to the table, it shouldn't stop you from trying to do so. So you should still try and do it.
Yeah.
Because ultimately that will, lead to a better soundtrack, but also a better video game. And that's going to make some other people who are playing it or listening to it, makes their soul, tingle just a little bit. So you have to try and make the most of every single project and situation, regardless of what the conditions are.
That's right. I mean, can you imagine if, when they made Mario or Zelda, they just didn't care. They didn't believe in the art of what the product that they were making. None of this stuff, these Mario movies that exist, these Zelda franchises that have lasted for, 40 years, like these would not exist if the people who initially made them, they were looking at the smallest of little pixels moving on a screen, if they didn't truly just believe with every ounce of their being that there was something deep in there. That's why they persist,
Yeah. And it's also very important to remember that you shouldn't expect your, the music manager or whoever is managing the video game, or at any sort of a level in that company, you shouldn't expect them to understand or see the vision that you have. Like, it's your job to communicate that to them, and everybody has their own strengths and things they understand, and you're hired as the composer, and it's your job to understand that essence, that soul, and try and bring it to whatever you're working on. It's like, we as creatives, we tend to sell ourselves on these very romanticized ideas of what is great and what is not, and what people are like and what the world is like and what things should be like. And in that, it's very easy to become very self-involved and think that everybody should see the world the way you do, or they should understand things the way or at the level that you do. But I remember hearing Nobuo Uematsu, the composer for the original Final Fantasy composer, talk about writing the prelude track, or the Final Fantasy theme, the original, the arpeggiator, or whatever you call that melody going up and down. And I think that happened. I don't remember what the allocated time was, but it might have been like minutes. But at the very maximum, it was maybe a few hours or something. But basically, they said, okay, by the way, we need some kind of a track or song for this main menu or this menu. I don't remember I think it was a menu of sorts. Yeah, like, we need a main theme playing here. Can you get me something in whatever minutes or hours? And he was like, okay, I'll do something. And he went to his office and did this very, simple up and down arpeggiated thing. And then he played it to the head of who was running the project. And he sat down and he said, like, And he said this apparently in English as well. He didn't say it in Japanese. He just said like, "Very good," and then he left. And that's the end of it. Like that's the history of the famous, fantastic Final Fantasy main theme,
Yeah.
arpeggiated theme.
Yeah.
So, you know, it and again, I say that to kind of demonstrate that they didn't have like a grand plan for like write
Mhm.
this epic theme that's going to live on for so, or for
But
many.
but still, like, one human being in one room, given a handful of hours, was able to find find something of his personality, find something of his humanity, of his soul, and put it into these arpeggiated notes that were done on 8-bit chips, and then it's like through all of this things that are working against it, he was still able to put this soul that now has persisted for 40 years or 35 years. So
Yeah.
it's amazing. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, and that's a good example of not allowing the circumstances or the conditions to limit your, well, first of all, creativity, but
Mhm.
pouring your heart and soul into it and trying to make it as meaningful as possible.
Mhm.
It's a shame I don't remember the time that he had. I think it wasn't, if it was in hours, it wasn't many. Like we're
Yeah.
talking about maybe 1, 2, or 3, but I think
Right.
it probably might have been in minutes or something. But
Wow.
yeah, you did mention that um, if we go back to the branding and communicating to others what it is that you specifically can bring to the table. You did
Mhm.
touch on some composers who who well, actually, let me just ask, who do you think does that the best as composers who communicate that the best?
Like who they are as a composer.
Yeah, what is it that they bring to the table uniquely? Do any come to mind?
It's interesting because a lot of rock rock people who go on to become composers are usually pretty good at that. And so like Danny Elfman is an easy example, or Trent Reznor is an easy example, because it's almost like they were able to create their artistic expression, their demo reel or whatever, for how they could be if they were to be stretched and pushed, and then use that as a way to transition into scoring. So as a straight composer, I think it's much harder. You don't see as many just people who come out, unless they do, maybe they have orchestral pieces that get performed or something like that, but it's much harder to brand yourself when you are just a composer. So yeah, I guess probably the strongest brands that I can think of, Johnny Greenwood, Radiohead, like they often come from people who people already like the music on its own as a standalone entity, and then they were able to pull that humanity out and use it in their projects later. Yeah, I guess that would be probably the easiest example. But in terms of straight composers, there are some composers that have a very clearly defined style. Trying to think of a easy example. Most of them probably haven't heard, they're lesser known or sort of friends of mine. So I'm trying to think of a sort of a known example.
I mean, that's fine, even if they're not.
Mm.
They don't have to be,
Mm. Yeah.
massive, and
So
people can look them
so
up.
right. Yeah. So like for instance, my album, my company put out an album. Was for Universal production music. We put it out last year, and it was kind of fantasy music. And I'm a pretty good orchestral composer. I'm much better when I'm allowed synthesizers and bigger drums and stuff like that, percussion in there. But when it's straight fantasy, I'm pretty good. So I wrote a few of the songs, but this was definitely one where I wanted to bring in some outside help. And a friend of mine, his name is John Theodore. He's a composer, and he had been doing, and he's a great guy too. Just a guy I like being around, which is part of what we were saying earlier. But he had been doing these like soundtracks for D&D campaigns. So they're orchestral soundtracks for Dungeons and Dragons, and they were like tavern music. When you're in a tavern, you put this thing on, and you put it on Spotify, and you just let the playlist run. And they're very popular. They get a lot of listens and a lot of streams. And this is one of these things that's like so hyper specific. It's a really niche sort of genre, but the moment you hear it, you think, wow, the music totally accomplishes what it's meant to do, and this composer is really good at like this composer knows what he's doing. And if I ever needed something, if I ever needed fantasy music, if I ever needed tavern music, if I ever needed something in that world, like I know exactly who I could call. And I think he gets calls a moderate amount, for that kind of stuff. And I know he puts out these D&D soundtracks as well, which get a lot of listens. So that's he's a great composer. He's not household name, but in my opinion, really strong branding for somebody who is just a straight composer. Yeah.
That's a really good approach, because it's also, there's a clear utility and a clear need. Like, people go out looking for that stuff. Whereas if I just said, oh, I wrote a fantasy album, it's like, okay, so did many others, and who's going to find it, etc. But obviously, when you write it in for that utility, and also you brand and market that as music for D&D, it has a lot more potential to be discovered and also understood. What is this? Because some people have done the same thing with some of the music I've written before. I didn't specifically sort of brand or market it that way, but some people have picked it up that way. So it's super powerful and very smart to do that in that sort of a fashion. And also, it's good in the going into the kind of meta, I guess, the strategy of it, because I guarantee that a lot of people who are developing video games, especially in that sort of fantasy genre, they're playing D&D, and they're looking for music for their gaming sessions. And so if they find something they like and they're developing some stuff, again, they're gonna go with what's familiar to them. And
that's right.
So it's a really good strategy. So you mentioned you had this teaching job that sort of helped you sustain yourself. How did you finally make that transition into full-time entrepreneur land? How did you make that happen? And was a lot of it based on the relationships you had built along the years prior to that, or was there something else that allowed you to do it?
It was mostly relationships. It was sort of a culmination of projects that were ongoing and sort of projects that I knew were coming. And it just felt like I was finally at a place where on a week-to-week basis, I had more paid sort of music type work than time, especially if I had a few days that I was teaching. So it became sort of just kind of a practical decision where, I like teaching. I still like teaching, and I probably will go back to it at some point. Maybe not for the same school, but maybe somewhere else. But just became like, is my time best used right now teaching, or if I stop, then I could be writing more music, or I could be, doing more business type stuff that I need to be doing. And that was just the decision. So this is just maybe about 2 years ago, that I made that decision to stop. And there are weeks, there are months when work seems like it's going a little slower than I hope it is, and there's times when I wonder whether I made the right decision or if I should be going back or whatever. But most of the time, things are going fine, and I don't regret it at all.
I think this is probably a good point to go back to that kind of macro existential dread and fear. You mentioned earlier that that's really where you've mentally struggled more than in the here and now, in the micro situations. Is that, have you made, are there some, I don't know, key mindsets or perspectives that you bring to the table once you hit the existential dread? And how do you manage that, either practically speaking or sort of mindset wise?
Well, one thing that I will often remind myself is that I've been, like, many times in my life, I have been, either just doing regular work that has nothing to do with music, and that's fine, and that's totally respectable. And if I ever needed to get back to that, that's fine. So there's nothing to be afraid of having a normal regular job. It's great in a lot of ways. So that's one thing that I will constantly remind myself. There's nothing to fear if or when I ever find myself in that situation. But the other thing, while I retain the dream of working in a creative field, I just remind myself that I've been in a lot of different places. I've gone through a lot of periods where I haven't had that much work, or not the type of work that I want to be doing. And gigs come, jobs come. Even though you always think, every composer thinks that whatever they're currently doing right now, this is going to be the end. This is the end of the road. We all think that. So recognizing that that's a pattern. Another thing that I think has helped me is some very big composers, A-list composers. I have been around, and maybe I've had a drink with them or something like that, and maybe they've getting a little loose and they're letting their guard down, and they tell me, I think about that all the time. And I'm thinking, like, you just worked with this huge game. You just worked with this huge director. And they're like, yeah, but every single one, I think that's it. This is the end. This is going to be the last. So when you realize that this is a pattern, we all have this, we all do this, even if you are incredibly super successful and maybe you never needed to work another day in your life, you still are dealing with this. So then you just sort of grow to accept it as not something to run from, but just something to sort of accept about, I don't know, life. It's not, there's no escaping this dread. I think everybody has it, even if they have a really stable, normal office job. I think people have fears and thoughts like this all the time. So it's just something I don't know, deal with, just accept. One trick that I often do is, somebody said, don't ever trust any fearful thought that you think after maybe like 9 p.m. So like if I find myself racing, my brain racing at nighttime, which I think probably is relatable to a lot of people, I just don't trust it. I think, no, like, that's my fear brain. That's not real. I don't need to give that any credence. And if I really, really get stressed, if I really care, then I'll write it down and I'll say, okay, I'll think about this thing tomorrow. Tomorrow morning when I wake up, I'll have coffee and I'll try to think, is that a real fear? Is that something I actually need to tackle and worry about and start working on? Or is this just my mind racing? So that's more practical thing that I do practice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically sleep over it is
Yeah,
the
that's right.
lesson.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's
And
exactly right.
that's super important because you can't expect to be at your best, cognitive level at the end of a day, because
Mhm.
you might be mentally exhausted, maybe physically exhausted, and your body generates all kinds of waste products that get you know jammed in all kinds of places in your body, and you just I think that's tremendous advice, and also taking it to that actual level, beyond intuition of like, oh, should I trust myself? No, like make the contract with yourself. I
Mhm.
don't trust any decision making past
Mhm.
this, time
Mhm.
of the day,
Mhm.
which is wise. It's like, no matter how I feel right now, I'm not going to make a decision based on these feelings right now. So I'm going to sleep over it and look at it again the next day.
Yeah.
Do you think the composers saying that this is going to be the last project, do you think they specifically mean that in a financial sense, like this is the because for me, like, I don't ever think, oh, this is going to be the last creative project I work on. I definitely doubt whether there's going to be money involved, because you
Mhm.
can always find some passionate developer here and there. Obviously, most of them don't ever take their stuff to the finish line unless there's
Mhm.
some proper structure and money involved. But do you mean that's more like a financial fear, or do you mean that
Yeah,
it's actually just like a creative fear?
I think it's more a financial fear. Um, there is something funny that happens to some composers when they get so wrapped up in the professionalism of the work. The creativity becomes almost an afterthought for some composers, not everybody. And you can sort of feel when you talk to them about it, you can feel whether they're still able to hold on to that creative spark. And I personally, I treat it like a precious little flame, like a little candle that you're walking and making sure it doesn't go out, you know. Um, but but there are some composers who maybe they lost it to some degree, or maybe they're able to just turn it on and turn it off, and depending on the project or whatever, but it's not a driving force for them. So yeah, usually it's money that they, or career trajectory that they're really talking about, that they could be working on something really exciting, a big project that people are going to talk about, and then believe that this will be the last big project that people will talk about out of them. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's usually
I,
what it is.
I can definitely imagine if you had very, very strict time constraints on you, like you have
Mhm,
to output X amount of material in
mhm,
this amount of time. Time is definitely like a big component in creative work.
mhm,
Um, and I don't know, like I've only worked with projects that have ample time. Like, as you know, video game development is pretty slow,
mhm,
which can be good for a composer in the sense that you have a quite a bit of time, or you can have quite a bit of time to work on something if you come in early, that is, obviously.
mhm,
Instead of like, okay,
mhm,
the game is 90% done, you have 2 months or a month and a half to do this thing. I don't know what the reality is with some of the some of the companies out there, but I can imagine that can certainly be the case. And music is like an afterthought, and then they
mhm,
expect fast delivery. But yeah, if they're creative ideas take time to brew and develop, and definitely the more professional skills you have, the more you can always bring the, if not the same, then at least a similar proficiency and efficiency into
mhm.
into what you do. Is that um have you I mean, first of all, do you find that to be like a like an accurate assessment? And
Mhm.
and is there like a minimum, some kind of a time window that you find you need to retain some artistic coherency and quality?
Yeah. So time is definitely a big factor for all of this. And time is also the killer of creativity, at least for me. I know some people who thrive under the gun, at least they say they do. I have a little bit of suspicion that maybe they're not doing the best, most creative work while frantic as they think they are, but I know some people who swear that that's when they do their best work. Um, for me, I usually set aside about a week for a song, but I'm also cycling other songs within that. So it's not like one song per week, but if you're giving me a task right now, I'm going to not promise that you'll hear a note of it until at least 1 week from now. And that will give me, and I'll be working on other stuff also in the background, but that will give me enough time to work and then sleep and then work and then sleep, and basically sort of like what we were saying about not trusting your brain all the time, but be able to test yourself tomorrow, and was that actually a good, a melody that you wrote, or was it not? And often the answer is yes, but not always. And sometimes you wake up and you're like, what was I thinking? And I'm glad I didn't have to show the developer this, because that was bad, and I made the wrong decision. But now I can fix it, and I have the time. I have 2 more days. I can fix it before they have to hear it. So
And
yeah.
do you feel like there is a time window? Because I always say that you are, as a creative, you're, the moment you start writing, you're on the clock. And the and I say that especially in the sense that you are gonna, this material is gonna become familiar to you. It's gonna become obvious to you. And once it's those things, it stops being stimulating. And
Mhm.
you can't, from that point onwards, it's difficult to pull drive and momentum out of it, because it doesn't excite you anymore. So do
Mhm.
you find that there's a certain time, or have you noticed a time in which you have to complete it or get to whatever, milestone or finish line before it becomes obvious? And is it something you utilize as a sort of catalyst for momentum?
Yeah, yeah. So when the creative juices are really flowing, like when when you're writing something and you write a chord pattern, and then your melody comes, and then you have a bass line, and then you have a rhythm, and it's all just working. I try to harness that. I push that as far as I can possibly take it, because those moments are special and they don't always come. Um, so when that happens, that's when, you know, just keep going until you run out of juice. And then what I like to say is trust trust, like, there's three me's, there's three yous. There's the you of right now, there's the you of the future, let's say tomorrow, and then the you of yesterday. And I like to trust all three of them. All three are right. And maybe they'll see different things at different times. And maybe one will be a little too far in this direction, and one will be a little too far in this direction. But generally, they're all going to see broadly whether something is good or not. So if you feel really passionate right now that this is going to be great, and you wake up tomorrow and it's just not there, then the question is like, what was it? Like, what am I now missing? Because there's something still there. Maybe it was just the bass line. Maybe it was just the rhythm pattern, the drums. They are doing something cool. What was it? What still has the spark that was yesterday, but today still kind of moves and still works a little bit. And then I start deleting stuff until I find it. I was like, oh, okay, it was actually, sometimes it was just a hi-hat pattern. It's as simple as that, but it's cool. So, okay, I'm going to just take the hi-hat pattern. I'm going to do totally different stuff. I'm going to try it again, go do a whole nother pattern where I do it. And then put it away, and then tomorrow I'm going to trust the two me's that worked on this now for 2 days, and same kind of process. And by the end of it, usually you have something that you're pretty happy with, because usually there will be some stuff that just persisted the whole way through, and then some stuff that you just abandoned the second time you heard it. And then, and then by the end of it, you usually have something that's pretty solid. No matter how you look at it, it's still holding up. It has a solid foundation. That's usually my way of writing most songs that I write. And another thing is, if something really is not working, or something is even tiny bit not working, but you've noticed it multiple times in a row, like, just get rid of it. Just the quickest thing you can do. Once you start to get a sense, it's almost like you're feeling like you're getting sick, and you can kind of feel like your throat's feeling a little scratchy, right? Like, you know what, that melody, I don't know about that melody. I'll listen to it tomorrow. And it's like, I still don't know about that melody. Okay, get rid of it. You're done. Like, it's been 2 times. Both me's, the me's of yesterday and the me of today, both think that melody might not be working. I'm cutting it. And then I'll just try something else. And almost always that's the correct decision.
Yeah, it boggles my mind sometimes when I've, sat down with a friend and they play something they worked on. And it's very evident to me, very clear that they don't really care about this song. Like, it's sort of, I think it's okay in this and that way, but it's not really doing anything for them. Like, it's very clear. And I just wonder, like, why do you bother? Like, you kind of work on this as if it's a chore, like it's your 9 to 5. You just kind of grind your way through it, but you don't care about it. You could have spent the same time searching for that thing that made you, really excited and made that creative idea click. And they just, they have something and they feel like they need to hold on to it and work on it and tweak. Whereas so often I've found it, as have many creatives found, that it's just better to look for that next thing, look for that thing that clicks and is undeniable and just works from the get-go, because you have plenty of problems to solve later on anyway regarding this song that is working. So don't make any more problems than you already have.
Yeah. If it's just not working and it persists that it's not working, you got to move on. But at the same time, I think for creative people, finishing projects can sometimes be hard, because that is the moment. One of the things I think about with creativity is you're exploring possibilities. So, I could be using this synthesizer, I could be using this drum kit and this reverb, and I'm playing, it's a sandbox, right? So, but then by the end of the project, you're stopping, you're cutting out possibilities, you're putting periods at the end of the sentences. There's no more exploration that's going to happen anymore. And that can be kind of a painful experience. So, but sometimes you have to just do it. You have to just accept that, like, I'm done, I'm moving on, I need to wrap this thing up. And again, I'm trusting the me of 1 week ago that was really excited about this song. And that me really loved that melody. And even though right now I'm feeling a little bit like, I don't know, I don't get it. It's not bad, but is it good enough? That's the question. Is it good enough? I'm going to just move on. And I'm going to trust that me, and I'm going to just make it sound good, and move on. So it's not a chore as much as it's about just kind of, and maybe this is fear versus not fear. Maybe the composer that you're talking about is fearful to trust themselves, and is fearful and is trying to make decisions based on what they think other people want to hear, or what they think a good composer sounds like, or whatever that might be. So they're not really tapping into that core part of their soul. Whereas what I'm talking about is I do actually trust me, and I trust me of last week. And the me of last week thought that this melody was really kick-ass. So right now I'm going to just do all the mixing I need to honor that melody and honor the me of last week that really believed in it, because I wouldn't have done that if there wasn't something there.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's a huge element. I was talking with this artist called Danimal Cannon a couple of weeks back, and he talked about this kind of surety that he's always had, like trusting that he can trust that he knows what he's feeling about the music that he's working on, and that keeping that sort of thread throughout his career, that's really important. And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of some of these musicians that I'm thinking about who I've witnessed that happen with them. It is very much a trust issue. They create something, maybe they're a bit excited about it, but then they start asking all the questions. And I watched the video you did on creativity, and I very largely agree with pretty much all the points. And it's important that you have this, first of all, the awareness of these different phases of creativity, and like you said, it should be a very important skill to learn how to complete things. But yeah, and when I was saying that they sort of these musicians that I've been talking with, and I'm thinking about in this case, they sort of get lost in the process. There's no structure in the process, and yeah, but especially like when we're thinking about the inspiration phase, it's like don't get sort of, you can't sort of be half-ish inspired of something and then take it to the next phase and start working and tweaking on it. You should really find something that ignites you properly, and there's something here worth exploring and pursuing, and then taking it further. But yeah, like people get mixed in these different phases. But I think what you said about the time aspect and becoming aware of that, and not only becoming aware of that, but behaving as if they are real. The past is real, and the future you is real. That's super important, because creatives tend to be pretty much just in the here and now, and that's why creatives tend to make impulsive decisions, and that's why they do all-nighters in their bedroom working on a track. And the lack of that time awareness is really hurting them, because that's how you get into situations where it's 4 a.m. in the morning, and you've worked on this track that is actually pretty good, but you've worked on it for 15 hours in a row, and you've lost all perspective on it, and you press delete, and you actually had something. If you just went to bed and came back to it tomorrow or next week, you could have had something solid, but you weren't aware of the time aspect of it, and then you just trashed everything you had. So I think that's a huge lesson.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm often asking myself, especially towards the end of the project, so we're almost mixing, we almost have made most of our big decisions, our big swings. One of the things I'm often asking myself is, what is this song really about? Like, if there were a hook, if there was just a simple, like, most exciting element, what is it? Is it the melody? Is it the rhythm? Is it the chords? Is it, some weird little synthy sound that pops in every now and then, but that's something that's like really has a spark of energy to it? Whatever it is, like, I often ask, what is this song really about? And whatever the thing that is really the special thing, the gem of the song, I want to try to elevate that. I want to try to bring everything that supports that and pushes it more close to the listener, and everything else that's kind of getting in the way of that. This hi-hat pattern kind of runs contrary to this melody. They're running at different rhythms, and maybe if they're on the same level, you don't notice that. But if you decide that this is really important, then you realize that this thing's getting in the way. Okay, so we're getting rid of the hi-hat pattern. And I find that when I'm working at 4 a.m. and I've been working for 15 hours, this is when I'm really bad at recognizing this question. What is the song really about? What's the gem of the song versus everything else? Missing the forest for the trees, so
Yeah,
that's when, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a super important skill that all the pros have learned and that they
Mhm.
utilize. And that's also relating to the ego, because you can have a song and you can have a lot of great creative ideas in that song. Like, oh, the
Mhm.
hi-hat is so creative and has this
Mhm.
interesting polyrhythm with a delay on top of it and super
Mhm.
cool. And then I have this riff that's going in here and it's so awesome. But you have too much stuff in a context of a single track. There's
Mhm.
only so much you can put in there and nourish it and put it to the spotlight and give it a bit of context. And that's the difficulty a lot of creatives have. Like, it's like, I can't live without all of these genius creative ideas in there. Whereas
Mhm.
you need to learn some humility and patience and get perspective and ask, what is this track trying to do and what is in the service of that.
Mhm.
And you're probably going to find that only a few things facilitate that service.
That's right.
And you have to kill off many of those fantastic creative ideas. And
Mhm.
I've worked with so many brilliant musicians who have so many great creative ideas, but they want to cram everything in there, whereas
Mhm.
whereas they really should be like more hands off and patient and humble and go more minimal. But
Mhm.
that's a really tough thing to do, and I don't think it's even possible to do that until you deal with the ego component of me putting all of these creative, intellectual, creative ideas in there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. The song is not you. You are not the song. The song is the song. And you need to honor it and try to let it breathe as best as you possibly can. You can guide it. You're there to write the song, you're there to guide it and bring it to the best place that you can possibly make it. But it is an entity that other people are going to experience, and they're going to experience it their own way. You need to help them hear what you're hearing as best you can.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. And it's I'm trying to look up one of the things you said in your creativity video,
Mhm.
um, which you kind of touched on there. You said something like, um, be hard on your work, but don't be
Mhm.
hard on yourself. And
Yeah,
I think
that's right.
that's brilliant, because again, a big problem is that people can't separate their creations from themselves. They
Mhm.
they they think their ideas and their creations are attached to them, and
Mhm.
if those ideas are bad or creations are bad, then they themselves are bad as well. And
Mhm.
it's, again, this is a mark of a professional. They can treat work as work. Not everything is personal. In
Mhm.
fact, most things are not personal, and it's that
Mhm.
ability to get impersonal that allows you to focus on the work and look for the answers that are best for the work, and not
Mhm.
for the answers that make you look uh, the best. So I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
that was super, super solid what you touched on there.
Mhm. And another thing about creativity, at least for me, in my one analogy that I sometimes use is it's like if you're making something out of plaster, you like kind of put layer over top of it, and then you start sanding away. So it's like you're building up and then you're sanding away. It's like you're building up and then you're sanding away. And you're never going to get that perfect minimal, like you said, final outcome if you didn't try a whole bunch of stuff first and then find just the right things that all worked and then got rid of all the other crap. So it's this constant process of up and down and up and down, adding, subtracting, adding, subtracting. And by the end, the final product might not look very close to the beginning, but it will have gone through that journey where you're constantly sort of following the spark of what makes the song special.
Yeah. I think that's a very solid analogy. And again, it takes so much, humility and perspective and patience to be able to do that. Letting some of those creative ideas go and give it some time.
Especially if you spent 4 hours on a synth sound and you really believe it's a cool sound and you love the little rhythm and you're just really proud of the work you did, but it's not working in the song. You gotta get rid of it.
Yep. And again, you do that by treating the work as work, and the work isn't you, and the work isn't your self-worth. Yeah, but I want to get touch on your synth, your infinite flow, because we only probably have about half an hour to go here. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, first of all, that's how I discovered you and your company, and did a demo on Infinite Flow, and well, people can go and watch it, but long story short is that it's fantastic, like in and out. What, like, first of all, when did the idea of this synth come to you, and when did you actually start? Well, I mean, let's start with when did this idea sort of come to you?
So I learned that so there's a synth store in Los Angeles that's kind of known, and apparently during the first year of the pandemic was their best year ever, because apparently everybody was just at home, couldn't go anywhere, and they just became obsessed with synthesizers. And they probably already was, and I'm no exception. So I purchased a lot. I made this Euro rack that year, and so on. And kind of what I was fascinated with, and I'm still fascinated with, is the idea of polyphony and specifically tuning. When we listen to violins, why does one violin sound different than 20 violins playing together, which sounds different than 40 violins playing together? And they all can be playing the same note. And if you were to tune every single violin, you would see that this is the perfect pitch, but all of them are some, like a standard, a bell curve kind of a thing away from the perfect pitch. But we like that as humans. We don't want it to be auto-tuned, right? We want it to be a little bit of human sort of variance there. So I got kind of obsessed with this idea of pitch being something that is imperfect, and that being actually more musical than less musical, and the idea that synthesizers are designed to be sort of mathematically precise, but where are the places within pitch that things are drifting a little bit, and where are the places that as human beings we enjoy that factor. So from there, then I started to pay attention to, as I asked myself what oscillators, and I started to pay attention to polysynths from the late 70s and early 80s. And this is a known thing about polysynths, that there's drift to the voices. There's drift within the oscillators, but there's also drift within the voices. And there's just this kind of spread that happens. And so then I was like, okay, well, can I just use the synths that I'm already doing to simulate that? So can I use Serum to just do that? and you kind of can, but not really. You're not really doing it in serum. Like you can fake it with some chaos stuff, and there's some techniques that I could talk about, but it's never going to actually give you that warm, Jupiter or Oberheim tone that like all these, like John Carpenter, all these synth scores that I'm obsessed with were made using that. And in my opinion, that tone is just really hard to capture. And you talk to some people and they'll tell you, oh, it's the analog circuitry, or oh, it's they recorded to tape. And all of these things I think are true. They're aspects that gave that sound some specificity. But what more people were overlooking than I felt was they should have been was this tuning aspect of the synth. So that was the impetus. Probably started 2020, where I just became really obsessed with how synths were not in tune, we're out of tune, and how to capture that in a really musical way. So then,
I think some of the manufacturers today include features like that. Like I think the Prophet, is it Rev 2? I think that one has like a general drift control. I don't know what it does under the hood. Like, does it? I'm sure there are many ways to set up that architecture, etc. But yeah, I mean, like you said, I feel like those like tape and certain circuit component qualities are sort of further down the chain, but they're not as fundamental as the actual pitch shifting. So yeah,
that's right. Yeah, so the Prophet Rev 2 actually does almost identical to what Infinite Flow does, our synth. Somewhere buried deep in their logic is a little database, and they just ask every time you hit the note, they just say, what voice are you in and how much should we detune this? And they're detuning real analog, circuitry, but they're using a digital lookup table and they're detuning it in that kind of a way. And there's a few software synths that have a little bit of this sort of sprinkled in, but there really wasn't one with a modern workflow, and there wasn't one that was able to do what we're doing to like the nth degree, to really model it out, to have different synths that you can detune them in the same way, to be able to build your own in your own kind of way. So that was where we, that's what we did it to try to do. Yeah. It was really because I wanted to play it. And then it's just kind of snowballed from there.
Well, that's often the case, that there's something you want, something you need, and then you try and look for it and it doesn't exist, and then you go and create it.
Yeah.
I want to touch on this in case we don't get to it otherwise. The interface of Infinite Flow is just about like one of the best, not only looking, but the usability of it. It's one of the best looking interfaces I've seen on anything, period. And it's super nice to use. It's just so comprehensively designed and done. Is that, first of all, who made, I'm sure you had a vision for that, but like who made that a reality? And also, like, what's your background with design? Like, is it just like an innate interest and ability, or did you dive deeper into that?
So a good friend of mine, his name is Alon. He's credited in the credits. He started the design, and we went through a few rounds of iteration. We had a completely different look for a while, and I wasn't ultimately happy with it. Actually, I showed it to Jeff Rona, the composer, who I used to work for, and he basically told me correctly, he's like, I don't know about this interface. And so then I went back to my friend Alon, and he basically, he knew that I was unhappy with it. He was he's busy guy, so he didn't have that much time, and he was helping me out. It was a favor. So he knew that I couldn't really articulate what I wanted as best. So then what he tried to do is he tried to ask me, okay, if this were a movie or a video game, like what would you want it to look like? What movie or video game would you say this has the right aesthetic? And so then I started to list off a bunch of movies from like the early 80s that all sort of fit the vibe of the sound of the synth that we were making. We were already making it. And one that we chose was War Games. I don't know if you're familiar with that movie. Yeah, it's about AI. I mean, it's a very timely movie now, but it's about AI taking over and basically starting World War III. And then that they have to choose. They have to teach the AI that war is bad, essentially. But it's 83 or 84. It's got a lot of these classic DOS screens and LCDs and lots of blinking colors and stuff like that we were really inspired by. So then Alon made a design which is from a layout perspective is pretty close to what the final product is, but a lot of the aspects like were not there in his design. And you know, I love Alon, but he got really busy. He got really too busy with work. So that left me, and I do not have a design background, and I don't even have a particularly deep interest in design. But that left me kind of feeling a little bit on my own, having to answer a lot of really big questions about the design. And I had a good foundation. Alon gave me a good foundation. I don't want to take anything away from the hard work that he did, but in terms of the colors, in terms of the LFO, the way the LFOs look, in terms of the drag and drop and all of those decisions, and actually Alon did the little DOS screen, so that was a good thing that he did. But a lot of this was just me kind of figuring it out, kind of trial by error, asking myself again, bringing these big questions into much smaller questions. Ask, okay, what would the LFO, if I wanted to make it look like it was coming from an old computer, what would the LFO look like? And if I want to limit it to only 3 colors, what would those 3 colors be? And if I want a font that, you know, it's just, you know, a lot of kind of back and forth. And then we arrived, you know, at this. And the other thing about the design, which I did not fully appreciate going into it, is that the programming language that we're using doesn't just accept files like you would expect. I mean, we could have maybe done that a little bit, but for the most part, almost every decision is actually a line of actual code saying, draw a circle with this width, with this color, with this opacity at this location. And so you have to write an actual line of code that says, draw a circle that does that. You have to write a line of code, and every single thing is as true code, which was a lot to do. And that also influenced the design because we had to keep that look intact while also dealing with the coding difficulties that went into that. So yeah, I would say maybe I did about 60 or 70% of the design myself.
Yeah. No, to me, it's pure eye candy. I could just look at that and feel satisfied. And
I think I appreciate that.
I love that in tools because, like, I really I would, like, a part of me would love to be a person who can just, you know, work on anything, like this most crappy looking instruments and libraries, you know, on a laptop and didn't care about all these details. I think that's a good thing, like, because it's, you know, you just focus on the most important thing, which is the music, which should be the most important thing. But to me, like, I'm hyper specific about where I work and what is the atmosphere like, etc. And I'm and also to me, like, it's a feedback loop with the instrument that I'm working with, not only the sound, but the way it looks, and can I interface with it very fast and easy and quick, and do I feel inspired? Like, do I feel like I can use this tool and tweak it? And there's a creative feedback loop. It's not only like a practical thing. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think absolutely. Everything with Infinite Flow is, it feels like it's really like fine tuned to that, and that's what I touched on in the demo. It's like you feel, I feel as if I'm just one with the instrument, and it's a huge pleasure using it. So, and as
I'm
I
glad
said
you
in
like
the
it. Yeah.
demo, I strongly recommend people using it. And like I said, in terms of the sounds, uh, just fantastic sound design, and out of the box, like super uh, great stuff. Especially if you're into like, cinematic, atmospheric, darker things.
Mhm.
So it's a excellent job with that, and makes me want to see what you. I don't know if you have future plans for creating more instruments, or whether you were traumatized by this first experience, but
There's a little bit of that. We're in a bit of maybe licking our wounds to some degree, but rebuilding to some degree, and asking ourselves some big questions about what the future of the company is going to look like. So I don't have a great answer. I will say that we are planning on releasing the filter of the Infinite Flow as a standalone plugin pretty soon, maybe in a couple months. And we're hoping we're going to release it for free for a certain amount of time. So we're hoping that we're going to drive a lot of people to the website through that, and then they'll be able to, get there. And we think our filters sound pretty good, and they sound good on other sounds as well. So, so I think hopefully people will enjoy that. In terms of bigger, like future synths and future projects, we do have, there's a lot of stuff I want to be working on. There's a lot of ideas that I have that I wish we had more time and more resources to accomplish. But yeah, I don't, as difficult as the process has been, just getting it out and getting bugs fixed and getting it, and promotion is a whole thing that I'm still trying to learn right now, which, anyway, I have a lot more work to do from promoting it. But uh I don't suspect that this is the first and last from the company when it comes to this type of product.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, marketing and promotion wise, you still have the most important thing right, which is the product. And
Thank you.
it's pretty I think like as it was with me and some of the other people that I actually, saw it from originally,
Mhm.
it very quickly, resonates with I think the target audience. And
Mhm.
so yeah. But I mean, I think as long as you follow the recipe you've been using so far, you'll probably make some awesome stuff. And I think creating the stuff you want to have and see and use but don't see
Mhm.
anywhere else,
Mhm.
that's a really good recipe to follow. Because
Yeah.
if you're looking for it, chances are uh, some other people are doing that as well.
Yeah. Hope so. That's the idea for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just remembered one more thing about the design that I don't think I mentioned. So again, Jeff Rona, the composer, he told me, and he was the guy who was on MIDI's original development. So he's been around since for a long time. He told me every interface tells a story. That's what he said. And then he was like, you need to figure out what story you want to tell. And what he was saying, when he said that, he was looking at our first design, which just didn't tell a story and wasn't very good. And that definitely made me think for a long time about what did he mean by that? What does that mean? Every interface tells a story, and how do I tell the story that I want to be telling with the interface? So that was very important driving force of the whole final design, for sure.
Yeah. And for me, it's definitely, well, I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point, but it's one of those rare, and I can't even think of many times that this has happened with any product period, but with infinite flow, you just feel like I want to get in there, and I want to touch things and tweak things, and most importantly, I want to create something, because it feels so, like, it doesn't feel like I need to reach for something and tweak. It just feels like it's there, and that is super impressive, because, like I said, I can't even think of many times that has even happened with a tool. Um, but maybe if we go into the last 3 points that I want to touch on, I have this retainment theory, which is basically this idea that creative people manage to keep the spark alive, going from their childhood into their adulthood. That life doesn't, like you said, you have this tiny candle with the flame, and you're trying to not get that extinguished. What do you think was the core thing in preventing that from happening? What allowed you to retain the creativity throughout your life into today?
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't have a great answer. I think I fought really hard. I think I was lucky in a lot of ways. I definitely think I'm lucky in a lot of ways that I was able to live a life where, even though it was hard and I was fighting every step of the way, I was still able to stay ahead of the flame going out. I mean, I don't know. To some degree, maybe I like to think it never completely goes out. But I think that with life and work and obligations and pressures of society, a lot of people can get diverted, for sure. And I have made it a goal of mine for a long time to just hold on as much as I possibly can, hold on to that, and just treat it like a precious little thing that needs to be cherished. So I don't really know what exactly. I think part luck and part just me just white knuckling it, holding on every step of the way.
So in part, it sounds like prioritization, which actually makes me think of it very differently to what I've done so far. But it's a lot of things in life come down to priority, because we have limited time and limited resources, and you make choices. What is it that you're going to do, and what is it that you're not going to do? And who knows, maybe it does come down to keeping it in the top, I don't know, 3 priorities, maybe 5, I don't know. But does that sound like a reasonable assessment?
Yeah. I mean, I would say probably 2. I mean, I would put probably family and then creativity as really my main 2 priorities in my whole life. Yeah, everything else, I mean, I can remember lots of moments when I was younger when friends of mine would be going out to a bar or going on a vacation or trip or something like that. And either probably I couldn't afford it, but not only could I not afford it, I just literally did not want to spend the time. Like, if I spend, a weekend, on a vacation at a house with you, like, is that going to be a weekend that now I'm not going to be working on music and not going to be getting better and not going to be feeding this creative spark? And then if I miss one weekend, then the next weekend, will the creative spark be 20% weaker or whatever, and then the next week, and so on. So every step of the way, I mean, I'm not a monk, I would still see people and I would still go places to some degree, but I would be really aware of trying to retain that time as much as possible. Yeah.
And that's again a big problem that a lot of creatives struggle with. Like, things don't become actual enough. They don't become tangible enough. And, you know, if you choose to go to this place, well, instead of that, that you know, shuts out a lot of other options. And if you look at your growth and progression and advancement as, you know, I build this ladder and then I build this ladder. Every time you don't do that, you don't do that. So every time you choose to do something else, again, you're prioritizing. And you know, if you do make those choices that don't serve the creative growth enough during a year, that's going to amount to a massive difference. And I think that actually frightens a lot of people, because it makes you accountable. It makes you, you know, it means that there's an actual tangible thing that you could do to make your dreams real. But it means sacrifice, and there are a lot of things that people don't feel should be within the pool of things that have to be sacrificed. But everything can be sacrificed. So it sounds like you had a very solid grasp on that reality from the, you know, I don't know, from the get-go, but at least throughout this journey, you've managed to remain very practical and keep that reality close to you, instead of telling yourself that you can do X and Y and Z while doing this, you know, creative pursuit.
Right. Yeah, I think that is true. Yeah. I at the end of the day, it really does go in. It's time and it's work, and I don't take that lightly. And this is not a, you know, one of those school assignments where you can just quickly read you know, spend 10 minutes right before the test and then turn it in, you know, like, it's not that. You need to get good. You need to be good. You need to know what you're doing. And there's only one way to do that. And that's just put in the time. Nobody's born with it, I don't believe. So I just decided to, as much as possible, put in and without driving myself crazy, without losing my sense of reality. Yeah. Put in the time.
That's a whole podcast of its own.
Yeah.
Losing your mind. Although some would argue that we've already done that, but
right.
Second to last point, what is your definition of an artist?
I think an artist is somebody who is driven to express themselves, express an idea or themselves that doesn't make sense. There's an impracticality to all art that I think is essential. So anybody who in any medium makes an expression that on some level just doesn't even make sense, I think that's art.
That loops back to the madness, because depending on, and again, I think this goes to perspective. Like, if we create art, if we're at the very fringes of what people understand, because I think artists go beyond the border of known reality, and they go in there and they make sense of what they see, and then they bring it back into the realm of what's understood. And then people go like, oh, okay, that's actually, that makes sense. And now that's incorporated into our understanding of what is. So that's kind of looking from what is into the chaos. It can look like something that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, I actually love your definition and exploration of that idea, because I find it to be very, very, very true. So cool. Last question. If you could instantaneously send a message to everyone's smartphone in the world, so basically a message or an image or something shows up on everyone's front screen. So they have to look at it before they can unlock their phone. What would you send other than advertising your own services?
No, I wouldn't do that.
I
With
feel
that
like
power, I wouldn't.
I need to add that asterisk.
Yeah.
Everybody's
You know,
like, well, I'll put my website on there.
Yeah. It would probably be something kind of corny, like be kind to yourself. It would probably be something like that. I don't know. I think we're all hard on ourselves. I think we all expect a lot, and we all push ourselves and want to do better and want to think that, like, let's say you're a runner and yesterday you ran 10 miles, and you in a certain amount of time, and you think you can do that every single day. Like that's just not how it works. Some days you can, but not every day you're going to be your absolute maximum. So it would be something about just being kind to yourself, letting yourself be human, letting yourself off the hook to some degree. So I probably would think a little bit more about a nice way of saying that. But yeah, that's probably what I would say to people.
Yeah. That actually seems to be a reoccurring theme on the podcast in terms of the answers. I think it's super solid because it kind of relates to like so many creatives are perfectionists, and they find it unacceptable to deliver anything, subpar. And it's in that pursuit of trying to make perfection, which is obviously an elusive, ever escaping thing that we are chasing. It's like they do nothing but, beat themselves over and over again we never achieve that. And that's imagine having a job where you can never do it perfectly. Like you can never do it right in that sense.
Right.
So, and I know many of the musicians that have quit or are very close to it or are continuously thinking about it. I think it will go a long way if they simply, were kinder to themselves and understood the difficulty of what we face as a profession or as a job.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I feel like I didn't get any chances to ask you questions. So maybe one of these days.
Well, I guess that's kind of the
the point. But one of
Yeah.
these days, I want to pick your brain a lot more. So
Sure.
yeah.
I mean, any time, and that I'd be happy to do that. So cool.
This was really fun. I really enjoyed this.
Yes, likewise. I really enjoyed this time, and there are like 100,000 questions that we didn't get to, as tends to be the case. But hopefully we can do this again sometime in the future. And it's also a pleasure to get to know you a bit. I mean, we've exchanged some emails, but it's very different to sit down and talk about real stuff for a few hours.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for inviting me on, and thank you for such amazing questions. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it.
Cool. Well, it's been my pleasure, and happy to hear the positive feedback.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
Well, I'll definitely be in touch, and I'll talk to you soon.
Cool. Likewise.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's do that. See ya.